Good evening and welcome to ETV's election night coverage. I'm Charles Bierbauer. The polls are closing now across the nation. Donald Trump has been declared the winner here in South Carolina. And in the hour ahead, we will be looking at these results and those that we come across and what they mean to us. Joining me first this evening is Scott Huffmon from Winthrop University. Scott, that's not a particular surprise. We expected South Carolina to fall exactly where it is. But in some of the early things that you're seeing, what stands out?
Well, you're absolutely right. No one expected South Carolina to go for Hillary Clinton. But as we're watching the East Coast close, we're going to have to watch for those key states. What happens in Florida, what happens in North Carolina, what happens in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And as those come in, if they lean the way the last polls have been indicating, then it's going to be a tough night for Donald Trump. But if he can show that the outlier polls were the ones that were truly representative, then Hillary Clinton could be in for a tough ride. But we'll know a lot more as each hour progresses.
So anybody who wants an early night should be hoping that Hillary sweeps the East Coast?
That's absolutely right. In fact, if she nails down 192 electoral college votes by 10:30, you can pretty much go to bed because she's got 78 that are going to come in by 11 o'clock.
All right, Scott, but you're 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours early, yeah. This could go either way.
And we've got some other things to talk about. I wanted to ask you one more thing before I turn to our other guests. Over the past few days, as you're the pollster amongst us, so what were you seeing that gives you any indication of how tonight's results are going to shape up?
Well, the post-Comey letter polls ended up stabilizing a little bit. Comey came out
second
Comey letter, right? That came out that said that there were new emails on Hillary Clinton's assistant's soon-to-be ex-husband's laptop. But as soon as he then came out and said, there's nothing new here, the polls stabilized a little bit. Now, they were a lot closer, and they did, and as we expected, they closed in the last few days, but they did stabilize. And the other thing to look at is the impact is not just those last few days of polls, but how the stock market reacted. It stabilized. So overall, the prediction
reacted and boomed for a day and a
it did, and not surprisingly, the peso reacted positively too.
Okay. All right.
It did.
That's a transitional note. Let me bring in our other guests here. Amanda Loveday, who is a political strategist for NP Strategy, a former executive director of the South Carolina Democratic Party, and Joel Sawyer, who is a Republican consultant for Campaign Grid. Let me get your initial thoughts, not so much based on the numbers, but where we are on election night. Amanda, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think that we're waiting to see, as Scott said, kind of where we are nationally, but I think we also need to be paying attention locally here in South Carolina. There are a handful of races that will help determine some factors in our legislature. I think there are some other county races that are going to be important for South Carolina voters to pay attention to, but I know everyone's really paying attention to the national race, and as Scott said, I think that we should know something later on in the evening.
What impact does the national race have in South Carolina?
Well, it depends on what Hillary Clinton's margin is. If she keeps the Obama margin at 8 or 9%, I think you'll see a very similar turnout across the state and local races. But if she can narrow that margin, 3-4%, then you're going to see some races that you didn't expect to go blue in South Carolina.
Can I ask a quick question about the impact of the national race? Because I'm wondering about the states that are along, or the counties that are along the border with states that are in play. Do you expect there to be kind of a differential turnout in the state legislative seats in the counties that are closer to North Carolina, closer to Georgia?
You may very well see that. In South Carolina is interesting because it has a lot of split television markets. So you look at the Augusta market, the Charlotte market, even the Greenville-Spartanburg market is split to a degree because you have Asheville in there. So you have a lot of you have a lot of bleed over from North Carolina advertising into South Carolina from North Carolina and Georgia on those border counties. I suspect that because of what is going on in North Carolina politically, that might be more pronounced in a place like York County.
Do you want to take a stab at what's going on in North Carolina since you bring it up?
Oh God, North Carolina is the wild card in this race. I think McCrory could certainly be in trouble. The sitting governor, the sitting Republican governor, could be in trouble there. I tend to believe that Senator Burr, the Republican incumbent senator, is probably going to be okay. Clinton and Trump is going to be an absolute nail biter in North Carolina.
And in terms of the Clinton-Trump race, which is everybody's primary focus tonight, what would you say has been its major impact in South Carolina during this campaign?
South Carolina has, because of the way our local districts are drawn, we have fairly few competitive races in November. We have, let's just say it, we have a very gerrymandered legislature where most races are decided in the primary and not the general election. I will say, if you're looking at one local race that was competitive, Susan Brill versus Mia McLeod. There was,
which is a state senate
that
race
is a
here
state
in
senate race
Columbia.
locally, and a lot of the advertising in that race went to link the Democrat and the Republican, respectively, to Clinton and Trump. Because, regardless of how this shakes out, these are the two most unpopular major party candidates in the history of ever, and probably forevermore. They are deeply unpopular. So, it's not really a groundbreaking strategy to try to link a local Republican to a national Republican or a local Democrat to a national Democrat.
And that wasn't the only local race that you saw that. I think local races all over the state were trying to link the Republican to Trump, the Democrat to Clinton, in order to garner support from one side or the other. And I think you'll continue to see that. I think in 2 years, when we're electing all of our constitutional officers here in South Carolina, they're going to have to speak for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, no matter who wins the election tonight.
Given the dislike for both Trump and Clinton, or at least the substantial amount of it, what impact is that going to have on turnout here, Amanda?
Well, I think it depends. I think, as Joel said, with the overlying media markets in South Carolina, I think that the counties that watch North Carolina news and watch Georgia news are going to have a different turnout than the folks kind of in the middle. But I think that we've seen, based on early absentee voting, that the turnout in South Carolina is tremendous. And I honestly, personally believe that we would see low turnout in this election, but I think that we may see the absolute opposite, and people are voting against the person that they think is worse than the other.
And that's a boomerang effect, because normally negative campaigns and dislike candidates depresses turnout, but the only person that partisans seem to dislike more than their own candidate is the other candidate whom they loathe. And so it's sort of like a boomerang effect, that it seems to be increasing turnout, because no matter how much they dislike their guy or gal, they hate the other one even more, which is, again, it could lead to an unexpected record turnout.
We saw
You agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's I think that Scott's on point, and I think that what we really need to look for is where those people are turning out. In terms of turnout being high or low, I don't know inherently helps one or the other. But if people are turning out in record numbers in places that are Republican strongholds or in Democratic strongholds, that's going to be the tale tonight.
And that's the kind of thing we're going to be tearing apart over days and weeks ahead as to what it really meant. I want to turn now to our other colleagues who are with us here. Furman University professor Dr. Brent Nelsen has got a couple of guests over on his side of the studio. Brent?
Yes, thank you, Charles. I am pleased to welcome to the table today two students from South Carolina. On my right is Sabrina Shutters from North Augusta, and she's a sophomore communication studies and broadcast journalism major at South Carolina.
Thank you.
And to my left is Suleiman Ahmad. He's from Greenville. He's a junior political science major at Furman University. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We are here to talk about the youth vote, millennials, college campuses, and let me just start by asking, was there a lot of enthusiasm among students on college campuses? Sabrina?
Well, I think millennials are more excited about this election year just because there are a lot of policy and social issues on the line, and I think it is also a time for change in Washington, and I feel like millennials feel like they can be a part of that change, so that might spark some enthusiasm with millennials.
Suleiman, did you see that on Furman campus, a big change election that got a lot of people excited?
I feel like it was a mixed approach after the primaries had occurred. A lot of millennials supported Bernie Sanders, and after his loss, they were, I guess, lack of better words, forced to favor Hillary Clinton. And it seems that, I mean, based on what has happened in Furman University, we started a SoCon Votes Challenge with various SoCon schools such as Mercer and Wofford, and we're trying to see who could have the highest voter registration and turnout. So in the past, Furman really hasn't done that well. In 2012 alone, our record was 24% in terms of voter turnout. 2014, that number was at 8%. And nationally among colleges like ours, those numbers were doubled. So with this project that we initiated at Furman, I think we sparked a bit more interest this year, especially with the two candidates and how strenuous this campaign has really been on everybody. It's definitely inspired a lot more people to get involved and the youth to get involved, but don't believe that it will be as large as the impact that Bernie Sanders had.
And there was an effort in Greenville County to change the rules so that students could vote easier in their college district. Did that affect Furman at all?
Well, so Greenville County, they had a questionnaire of sorts that was kind of reminiscent of the 1960s, like literacy tests, and that it would ask you, what church do you go to, what's your address on your fishing license, and these are people from outside the county who are looking to vote in Greenville County. State election laws allow for students to register using their college dormitory addresses, but that unfortunately was not possible under the Greenville County laws. There was an injunction that happened, but unfortunately with the 2-day window we had, we couldn't really register as many students as we'd liked.
Yeah. So I suppose, Sabrina, you all think that Furman students are illiterate anyway, but no. Did you see a lot of your friends go off to the polls today, or did they stay home?
A lot of my friends did go to the polls, and I did see that a lot of students that weren't able to go home fill their absentee ballots, and so I do think there was, that tremendous turnout even within millennials. So.
Well, good. Well, we'll look to find out when we see the turnout numbers. But Charles, back to you.
Thank you,
That's
Brent.
what we have here.
Let's not set Carolina against Furman over this. Let's be nonpartisan, at least in this studio here tonight. Scott, you're the guy who's peering most closely at the map in the 6 minutes or so that we've been chatting here. What's up?
Well, Fox has called a few more states than the New York Times, but Fox has it with Hillary at 68 electoral college votes and Trump at 67. The differences come down to, for one, Illinois. Fox has called Illinois for Clinton, whereas Clinton also got New Jersey, Massachusetts, of course Vermont early on, and Maryland, whereas Trump has taken Oklahoma, already Indiana and Kentucky, which we knew, and West Virginia, and naturally South Carolina. So they're coming in, and we're really waiting to see now how those key states in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida are doing. That'll really let us know how the rest of the evening might be going.
Right, and we're less worried about the predictables than the unpredictables here. I want to come back to some of the points that Amanda, you and Joel were making in terms of the mood of your respective parties. I mean, you are nominally a Democrat and a Republican here. Internally, within the party, Joel, what is the sense of the party? Is it riven? Does it have a defined gap between its two component parts?
Absolutely it does. I mean, I think that there are a couple of things going on. There are Republicans who, and you noted this earlier, who are dislike Hillary Clinton so much that they are willing to accept someone as unacceptable as Trump. They're willing to get on board, be behind him, just because their disdain for Hillary Clinton drives them to do so. I think that our party, for the past 8 years under President Obama, has been a party that is defined as being against things, rather than what you saw in the good old days in the 80s and the early 90s, where Republicans like their ideas or hate their ideas. They had ideas, right? I mean, there was an intellectual movement on the conservative wing that was putting forward ideas and putting forward policy and throwing out food for thought versus being just against Barack Obama. Now, being against Barack Obama and being against Hillary Clinton, that's going to be good enough for some people, but I think that there are Republicans like myself who want a little bit more and a little bit more intellectual curiosity and a little bit more focus on policies rather than what we're against.
Let's say, for the sake of discussion, Trump wins the election tonight. And so the Republican Party, including the never-Trumpers, swallows hard and say, we won.
Right.
On the other hand, if he loses, then the party's got the real reconciliation question.
Right.
How does it approach that?
It's curious to see, I'm curious to see if they will, because at the end of 2012 there was this big long postmortem about how we lost to Barack Obama and all of the things that we needed to do to win 4 years from now, and we didn't do any of those things. Right? There was no real substantive African American outreach. Showing up in a black church 2 weeks before the election is not Republicans reaching out to the African American community. The rhetoric on immigration, if anything, got worse rather than better. Old white men are a shrinking demographic in this country, and we have to appeal to women, we have to appeal to Hispanics, we have to appeal to African Americans. And even if those gains take a really long time, we've got to make some serious progress on that.
Thanks for that dose of reality about older white men. Amanda, let's do the same thing with you. Hillary wins, and the Democratic Party says, "Whew, we pulled that one out," perhaps narrowly, but nonetheless, they won. They don't win, and Trump is in. What kind of a Democratic Party do you have at that point?
If we don't win?
Yes.
I think it's reflective on what we need to do moving forward. I think Joel has done a lot of my job already tonight by discussing what the Republican Party needs to do to move forward. But I think the Democratic Party, I think you have seen more of a coalesce around our candidate than the Republicans. You've had a lot less people hold their nose, per se, today than some of the Republican Party has had. But I think that no matter what, if she wins or loses, I think both parties have to be very reflective on what we have moving forward. We have very elderly candidates this time around, both white candidates this time around, and I think that over time we need to digest and progress to bring in different folks on the national ticket. But I have to say, I'm very proud to be a Democrat, because I hope we will elect the first woman president tonight after having the first African American president.
And you still had, just to keep this in train here, I'll get to you. You still had many Democrats, I'm presuming, who went to the polls and said, I'd rather it was Bernie.
Absolutely. Same with the Republican Party, hoping that it was Marco Rubio.
Same that it was anyone else. Right.
So I think that happens no matter what. There are voters who want it, if they voted for Barack Obama, potentially had wanted it to be Hillary Clinton in 2008. So I think that happens every year that we have a presidential election, but because of the negative numbers you've seen in both candidates, both parties, no matter who wins tonight, has to coalesce around whoever the head of their party is going to be. It's either going to be the president, no matter what party that is, and then the opposite party has to figure out who that head is, because I don't think that it's going to be Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton if they're not the winner tonight.
Scott, I interrupted.
No, I had a question about your parties in the state, because you seem to have very divergent paths. The Democratic Party for the Democrats has become stunningly important. This is the first test of African American support here in South Carolina for the Democratic presidential primary in South Carolina. It is the state that really put Barack Obama on a path to win. It is the state that decisively said Hillary Clinton is going to be the next nominee. But at the state level, it's still struggling. It's still that classic 10-point gap statewide. On the other side, the Republicans, you've got that 10-point gap. You've got all of the constitutional races, but the role of South Carolina Republicans in the presidential primary has been chaos creator. It's essentially as if Loki came down and was organizing what was going on. The Newt Gingrich was a surprise to everybody,
right.
And then the decisive move behind Trump. So are the parties looking at changing anything about the structure of the South Carolina primaries, given our importance in the presidential cycles?
I don't know that there will be a real move to do that on the Republican side. I mean, look. I mean, this year, yes, Trump won here, but he won a lot of other places too. Newt Gingrich was a little bit of an anomaly just because of, there was a lot of, distaste, trepidation out there for Romney. And when Gingrich put together those two very strong debate performances back to back, I think at that moment in time, he was the man of the hour. I think that South Carolina will continue to play a prominent role early in the process. And I would argue that South Carolina does have a lot of Republicans here who are diverse in priorities, whether it be fiscal conservatism, evangelical focus, strong military. I mean, I think if you go down the list of those different types of Republican constituencies, they're all represented here, and it's a relatively inexpensive state to campaign in. I think that there's a big interest on the part of the candidates to keep cheap states early in the process.
Amanda, you want to respond to?
I agree with Joel. I don't think we'll change the primary process, but I think for South Carolina Democrats as a whole, we need to focus on two things. We need to focus on discussing and having issues and ideas about our kitchen table issues and our kitchen table ideas for a family, how to get food on the table, how to pay our taxes, how to make sure that children are getting to school on time and they're going to the best school possible. And then I think the second thing is candidate recruitment. In 2010, we had one of the best up-to-down ballots that Democrats have seen in a very long time, and we had one of the closest races in the country. So I think that if we focus on candidate recruitment and really see what type of Democrat can win in South Carolina and what type of Democrat the Democrats in South Carolina are wanting to vote for, I think that we can see progression into electing Democrats. But don't get me wrong, we're not going to win every race in 2 years.
You have to have candidates to win.
Right.
Everything below the congressional level that I voted on today, state senate, state legislature, the county commission, everything was no opposition.
But a lot of that has to
only
do
Republican.
more about gerrymandering and more about redistricting and way less about candidate recruitment.
And we're going to get to that, I assure you, in a minute. Just to kind of button this segment, don't both parties have to look to a next generation? They've got to make a generational shift. Yes?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that was easy. Brent, speaking of generational shifts, over to you.
We have the next generation right here. So let's talk about these candidates. How effective were they in reaching millennials? What kind of campaign did they have to reach first-time voters like yourselves? And Suleiman, I'll start with you.
Well, I feel as if both campaigns essentially failed to reach millennials. I guess we'll find out tonight whether or not that came into fruition or not. But more so, I feel like Donald Trump was more effective in reaching millennials than Hillary Clinton was. And that's reflective in the primaries, as we've seen with Bernie Sanders, how we compared with Hillary Clinton. I mean, 84% of millennials showed up to vote for Bernie Sanders, and that was not the same for Hillary Clinton.
Let me stop you there. Why did a 72-year-old man with wild gray hair appeal to people who are 18, 19 years old?
Well, it's the premise that he put out there, and going back to his slogan. I mean, a future to believe it. That's reminiscent of Barack Obama's 08, hope campaign. That same amount of, emotional drive is what brought out millennials. You don't have that with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is not an emotional candidate. She has a great resume. She's more than qualified to be president. But when she's been in the public sphere for 20 plus years now, it's kind of like she's become a robot.
Sabrina.
I think Trump is something new for millennials and our voting season here. And so I think that's what incites the passion for millennials being attracted to Trump's campaign and making America great again. And because these two candidates are unorthodox, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen. And along with that, Trump's social media, just, every day, his Twitter and things like that, he was always passionate with that. And that's everything that millennials are about these days with social media. They're following that constantly, and seeing that candidate do that makes them attracted to his campaign.
Did both of you follow Trump and Hillary on Twitter? Well,
I did. I think one of the funniest things that I came across was that Hillary was trying to make herself seem cool. What she went by was Chillery. And it looked like pandering. I mean, I understood that, millennials came out in support of a Democratic candidate, and Hillary had to reach out to them, but I didn't think she did it effectively. I see more so, for example, at Furman, more Greek life, white male students more inclined to vote for Donald Trump. And it seems that his aggressive tweets, I would place them as aggressive, but others would say it was more entertaining, if anything, really appealed to those individuals.
Sabrina, you follow Donald Trump, or did you follow?
I did, and I think that's just because he used his Twitter much more than Clinton did, I believe. I think that with that aggression, he was able to get his issues out there much more aggressively than Clinton did in the end.
But he also talked in terms that weren't always
That is
supportive
true.
of
That is
women
true.
and
That is
minorities.
also
So how did especially young women,
it did.
treat
That did
those tweets?
affect. I believe that did have a huge effect on women vote for Trump. But at the end of the day, I think it's about those issues in Washington and our policy. And if we can get down to the nitty-gritty and look at those issues instead of talking about that, then I think we have a campaign. So, and that's what I feel like he was trying to get past.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, neither one were perfect in reaching millennials.
Right. I think there was negativity on both sides with not being able to reach out to millennials.
Suleiman?
I completely agree with that statement. I think Hillary Clinton's not Obama. She's not Bernie Sanders. Donald Trump is also ineffective when it comes to reaching out to millennials. It's just those demographics just don't play well for them. If anything, millennials now their hands are forced. I mean, we have to pick a side.
So don't try to be cool. Is that a rule for candidates? Don't try to be a millennial if you're not one?
Depends if you're genuine.
Okay. But policy. Now, I know that a lot of college students were really interested in free college and those kinds of things. Hillary picked up on some of that a little bit, but not a lot. Did that weaken her enthusiasm among college students, especially among Democrats?
No, I felt that Hillary Clinton's approach in regards to in regards to college was, to put it simply, realistic in the long term. Most of the comments that I've received from members of your generation, Generation X, etc.,
Old white guys.
is that we're too idealistic. I don't agree with that. Still don't agree with that. I still believe that free college is possible if we can work towards it. And Joe Biden said this himself. Democrats have never won by being realistic. We've won by pushing this idea that it's possible. So ultimately, I'm still going to vote for Hillary Clinton. She didn't have the same approach as Bernie Sanders did, but it's definitely towards a future of an America that I hope to see.
And Donald Trump didn't promise free college. But so what did he provide? Patriotism? What was
Trump
it?
University.
Well, Trump University, yes.
Yeah, I think a greater sense of patriotism, because I think we've lost that in the past few years, and I do think that I do agree with you on that. Clinton, her approach to free college was more realistic, whereas Bernie Sanders, I know he came to University of South Carolina, and free college was his a big part of his campaign. So that realisticness is a really important part there, I think.
Okay. But building a wall, is that realistic?
No, not exactly.
But students still were enthusiastic about
I think
kind of
I think that's
policy.
just a proverbial phrase that can become something greater for his campaign, and I just think that was just a original proverbial item there.
Well, thank you. On that note, I'll turn it back to Charles.
Thank you, Brent. One of the last terms that we used here was gerrymandering in our conversation. And like Scott, I went to my precinct today, and apart from the presidential race and one or two others, there were unopposed candidates running, and we're all seeing a lot of that. I've had a couple of recent conversations with Matt Moore, the South Carolina Republican chairman, and Jamie Harrison, the South Carolina Democratic chairman. And one of the things that they seem to agree on, and they talk about this quite openly and in various fora, is that gerrymandering is really the enemy of both parties. It makes it extremely difficult for either party to create competitive races and really to recruit good candidates, because nobody wants to be the sacrificial lamb. What can the parties do? What influence might they have to get rid of this, if you agree with it, that the gerrymandering is a problem?
I think gerrymandering is a problem for a functional democracy, and it's become worse and worse over time. When you have districts that are drawn in such a way as it is either functionally impossible for a Democrat to win or functionally impossible for a Republican to win, those races are decided in primaries. Primaries reward extreme candidates on both ends. And when those candidates get elected and they go to Columbia or they go to Washington, D.C., there is no incentive for them to compromise with anyone. And in fact, compromise becomes an electoral liability. If a Republican in South Carolina said, I'm going to try to meet Barack Obama in the middle, he would get destroyed in his next Republican primary. So we have to draw races that are more competitive. In terms of how we do that, we have to take it largely out of human partisan hands. Go to some sort of nonpartisan redistricting commission and let legislators just give an up or down vote on it with no amendments.
So the human partisan hands you're referring to are those of the legislature.
Correct, right.
They're drawing their own districts, so they're able to say, I don't want this house in my district, I don't want to run against person X or person Y, and they're able to also say, I only want a specific percentage of African American voters in my district, or I only want a specific percentage of white voters in my district, which is making it lean one way or the other. And as Joel said, it's an incredible issue we have, not only in South Carolina, but across the country.
It's universal.
And anyone that draws their own district, it's the same as if you were to name your own salary or write your own job description. You're going to do it to benefit you rather than benefiting the greater good and the voters out there. And I totally agree with you. I think that it's a very big problem in South Carolina when you go to vote and all the way down the ballot you don't have many options.
Well, if the two of you agree on that and the two state chairs agree on that, is there any way to develop momentum that delivers that message to the legislature, which would, I think, have to basically say, we're stepping back and we're going to create this?
Well, it has to be a law, so it has to pass the House, the Senate, and be signed by the governor. And so you're having people determine their own destiny, make this decision, and I think that's the hard part. Now, if you're able to find enough momentum to get a bill drawn and then somehow get the Republican leadership to bring that bill to the floor and get a vote on it, then I think that we're kind of have a little bit momentum, because I think it will be extremely detrimental to any Republican or Democrat who votes against this publicly.
In California, it would be a ballot initiative, just like that. It would be so easy to do.
They have it in California.
They have it in California. But the magic phrase you said was get it to the floor.
Right.
And that is the exact kind of thing that likes to die a painful death in committees in South Carolina.
Well, and we've seen, and I talk about redistricting and about gerrymandering a lot when I go out to different groups, and I think what has to happen, it has to be, as you said, kind of a grassroots movement. The things that we've seen done in this state that have happened quickly, two specifically that come to mind, is the Confederate flag and the Ashley Hall gun bill. And those two things happen in expedient process in South Carolina compared to anything else, because there was a grassroots movement and no one would leave the State House until those two things were determined. And I don't think we'll see that happen until we see enough South Carolina regular voters go to their legislator and say, this needs to be done.
I mean, it's going to be tricky too, because as we've seen under Governor Haley and under Governor Sanford before that, which is near and dear to my heart. I mean, both of those governors made restructuring a priority, which, without getting into all the ins and outs of it, is you're asking the legislature to voluntarily cede power to someone other than themselves. There have been a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats who have stood in the way of that. A political body does not like to voluntarily devolve power either to a nonpartisan redistricting commission or to the governor or to the people of the state. It's going to be very difficult, and it's compounded by the fact that, keep in mind, these are gerrymandered districts right now. So these races are decided in primaries right now. If these races were decided in the general, I think it would be a lot easier for regular South Carolinians to have a voice. But right now, the people getting elected to the legislature are those appealing to this very small percentage of the primary electorate who are the most conservative or the most liberal, most extreme on either side.
Happy that they're in a safe seat.
And are happy that they're in a safe seat.
Of course,
Right.
of course. And if anything were to be done, the window is between now and essentially the 2020 census, which is the next opportunity. You could do it at any time, but the 2020 will then bring us a redistricting that's intact for the following decade.
So we only have 2 or 3 legislative sessions,
You've got
which
very little.
for anyone who follows bills that get passed in South Carolina, that's very minimal.
Yeah.
What do you expect the legislature to be focused on this session, Amanda?
I think transportation is going to come up again. I think that the roads bill that was passed this past session was a Band-Aid, and you're going to see that get brought up significantly throughout the legislative session.
I think that that'll be the key issue, and there will also, I think, continue to be some ongoing discussions about education funding, and college funding as well.
Do you
Okay.
think Act 388 will be revisited at all?
No.
Tell our audience what. Tell me what.
Sorry, the thing that we used to fund our schools via property taxes, and then we took that away and funded it via type sales tax, and it is a lot of educators have been against it. The tax cut folks have been very for it, and everybody who saw their property taxes go down, since property taxes tend to be the most hated, we're very happy with it. But it's still, as the lawsuits about equity funding go forward and trying to achieve a, quote, minimally adequate education, I was just wondering if you thought they would be revisited, and you think that's stone.
I don't know that it will be revisited in a substantive way. I think that our tax code in South Carolina is a complete abomination. We exempt more sales tax than we collect in South Carolina. It's ridiculous. There's so many exemptions and special interest loopholes. If 388 is revisited, it'll be revisited and given just a little Band-Aid, a fresh coat of paint. Hopefully, if they were to get into it, they would address larger sections of the tax code in a more substantive way. But while I breathe, I hope.
While we've been chatting, anything red or blue pop up on your screen here, Scott? I know a lot of the races we've been watching or that are most of interest, North Carolina, Florida, are still being considered probably too early to call.
Yeah, and and they're going back and forth. If you look at, for example, Virginia, it's very overwhelmingly red, but that's mostly less populated areas. And the areas that Hillary Clinton is getting are the same as Barack Obama, minus 1 or 2. So that could be a sign that the polling was a lot tighter than people thought, which was something going into it. There were a few outliers that said Hillary Clinton's up by 12, and there was absolutely no way that it was true. A couple of weeks ago, it was down to 4, and then the issue with the FBI that popped back up, and I think we saw that shrink again, and so we are seeing Virginia even closer than folks thought. But North Carolina, there's still a lot of counties out. The traditional counties that you expect to be blue and red have come in. It's, as Donald Rumsfeld might say, the unknown unknowns that still has us guessing. Florida, we know Marco Rubio has been declared the Senate winner in Florida. Right. But if you look at the counties in Florida that have gone for Hillary and compare that with the counties that went for Barack Obama in 2012, there were a few key counties that Obama got that Hillary did not. And it looks like Trump may just eke out the tiniest of victories in Florida. And if he does, North Carolina, which is leaning just ever so slightly towards Hillary, Pennsylvania, which right now you have hardly anything reporting, but what is reporting is Philadelphia and a more rural county, so Hillary's up, but that's completely unknown. And of course, Ohio, where you have most of the urban counties in, Hillary ahead there. So if Trump gets Florida and Virginia, then it's going to be a lot longer of a night than I think the Hillary camp was hoping.
I will say this about Virginia. The closest parallel I could think of is there was a gubernatorial race in 2013, Ken Cuccinelli versus Terry McAuliffe. Very similar dynamic where you had historically unpopular gubernatorial candidates on both sides. Where Cuccinelli is very disliked among Democrats. Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, Republicans couldn't stand him. The polling had Terry McAuliffe way ahead, and then he just barely eked one out against Ken Cuccinelli. So it would not surprise me in Virginia, despite what the polling has said showing a comfortable Hillary margin, that it ends up a lot closer
Mark
before it's
Warner
all
was
over
the
with.
same way. When Senator Mark Warner ran last year, or 2 years ago, I'm sorry, he was far and away the winner in polling and then barely eked
Well,
it out
I
on
think,
election
Is
you
day.
know,
that unique to Virginia in some way?
No, but we've seen it in Virginia much more recently, and it happening where the polling you had, now in this case it's just been a few outliers that had Hillary Clinton up by double digits. In those cases there were more polls that showed stronger leads. So Virginia, because of the dramatic differences in the state between Northern Virginia, which is essentially its own state, South Side, Tidewater, and Richmond, which all can go blue, and then the mountain parts of Virginia, which can be deep red. Because of the differences, I think it's been very hard to poll in the last few cycles.
And I think that's the same for Florida. You have the Panhandle that's going to vote one way, and then you have Southern Florida that will vote a completely different way. And I think that allows for some incomplete polling.
And in Florida, the Panhandle, I think, closes at
At
8 o'clock, so that should be coming in.
Should be coming in.
Fairly swiftly. Brent, let's come back to you for a few minutes, and we'll keep watching screens over here. And everyone seems to be frantically.
Well, thanks, Charles. We're going to talk a little bit about where students, millennials, get their political information. So, Sabrina, how do you find out about what's going on in politics?
Well, this is the digital age, and I do think that our age group is trying to take the variety of outlets we have now and use that for their advantage and use that to get involved with our politics nowadays. And by using that variety, you have unbiased information coming to you from all sources and from all sides of things, so you can then get involved with that. And it does allow our age group to be more involved with the political scene and
So what are some of those sources that you're talking about exactly? Give some examples.
Well, you've got CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and if you choose to follow the more conservative or the more liberal sides, then you can, but it's better to just follow the ones that are follow ones from both sides, so you have all views coming towards you.
So you'll sit and watch both Fox and MSNBC? To
Well-
get both sides? Is that right?
Well, that's the ideal political image, but at the end of the day, journalism professors at USC, I know that my professor does have us watch CNN on a regular basis for daily quizzes, and that does give a more balanced view of things and allows us to get all sides of things.
Suleiman, thank you. Where do you get your information?
So not to fuel the rivalry between USC or Furman or anything, but with my conversations with Dr. Danielle Vinson, she kind of pointed out how the New York Times and the Washington Times, or Washington Post rather, have been very effective at being nonpartisan. And it's really concerning in this climate. Zeke Miller from Time Magazine pointed out a survey which involved 10,000 adults in the United States. This survey pointed out that liberals have become more ideologically liberal, conservatives have become more conservative. So we're at the pinnacle of partisanship in this country, and it's being reflective in the media sources that we go to. For example, in any sort of engagement in Syria, the Washington Times will claim that it's the State Department's fault or the Secretary of State's not being effective. The Washington Post will cover that and decide to say that it's the Russian government that's not effective with its airstrikes and not place any blame on the Obama administration. So it's very difficult at this time to really find who has the best information. And we live in the information age. I mean, Facebook and Twitter kind of blast you with headlines and quick, what's the word? bait, clickbait essentially. And so that's kind of reflective in what you see on media platforms.
Well, Sabrina, do you go to your phone for information at all, or do you watch the cable networks mostly?
I tend to watch the cable networks. Maybe that might be because I'm a broadcast student, but I do tend to watch the cable networks on television. But I think with all the technology apparatuses we have nowadays, it's at our fingertips 24/7. So it's always a device that you're using, whether it be your phone, tablet, laptop, or the television.
I mean, you'll get like clips from MSNBC on Facebook,
Right,
but
right.
then you'll get a clip from Fox News. So it's like little snippets. So I definitely agree with that.
Do you get political emails from your friends? And how about Facebook? You haven't even mentioned that. So
Political emails from friends?
yeah.
I haven't received any. More so Facebook posts. I normally like venting on Facebook or something, and I might get into a political conversation. I'll place as a conversation with friends of mine from the right side of the aisle.
I think my friends tend to put their opinions on Facebook in their post. Rather than staying neutral in things during this season
Okay.
of politics.
Good. So that's the news from looking at the newspapers and TV, Charles. So
I'm greatly encouraged that we're looking at newspapers and TV and every imaginable device in front of us, including the one in front of Scott here. Scott, I know you've been looking at the South Carolina congressional races, most of which were utterly predictable. Anything there?
There really is nothing unexpected. Jim Clyburn is just taking his district handily. I believe he's got over 60% of the vote right now. Tom Rice, whose district was created in 2012, and that was his first time running. He won that by 12 points. He's ahead now, 60 to 40 essentially.
And that's the Myrtle Beach, Horry County
That's
area.
the Horry County.
Georgetown.
And now the 5th congressional district, Mick Mulvaney. That is Mick Mulvaney versus Fran Person. That is something that the Democrats were really hoping for. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee from the House of Representatives had put a good bit of money in it, and given that money, it's a zero-sum game. Money going into this district is money not going into some other battleground district. That meant that they thought they had a chance. But right now, it's not heavily reporting. Mick Mulvaney is doing extremely well there.
And that was once a Democratic
That's
district,
right.
but
Well,
it's changed.
It is
demographically. It's changed.
That's right. It's so with the Tea Party surge, Mick Mulvaney was able to knock off longtime incumbent John Spratt. And after the 2000 census, when the 7th district was created, eating into a little bit of the PD region that was in the 5th district, the black voting age population in the 5th district shrunk. So that got even safer for a Republican and harder for a Democrat. And this is the first time Mick Mulvaney's seen a semi-serious challenge. But
Well, his semi-serious challenge bolstered considerably by the president of the Vice President Biden, who made several visits.
Joe Biden and Jill Biden both made multiple visits to Rock Hill and the entire district, helping them. But it doesn't seem to be doing enough. Jeff Duncan and Joe Wilson seem to be coasting. Don't know about Trey Gowdy's district yet.
All right, let's shift then from the congressional races to legislative races. Amanda, you and I were talking before the show about where there could be significant shifts within the legislature. Not that it's going to go from a Republican-dominated legislature to a Democratic one, but what strikes you as certainly important to watch at this point?
The Republicans are not going to lose majority in either House or Senate in South Carolina, but there are 2 Senate seats that have been historically Democrat. Both the Fairfield seat, which was Senator Creighton Coleman's seat, he lost the primary to Mike Fanning, and then Joel Lorry's seat in Richland County, that is a general election between Mia McLeod, who's currently a state house member, and Susan Brill. And both of those seats, again, historically Democrat, but both Republicans and the Republican Party across the state has been fighting hard for those 2 seats. If the Republicans happen to pick both of those up, you're going to see a significant shift in the power of Democrats in the South Carolina Senate. There's a joke amongst politicos that the Democrats in the South Carolina Senate really do control the Senate because of the factions of the Republican Party. But if we lose those 2 seats, you're going to see, again, significant change, which could potentially change the President Pro Tem in the state Senate.
Explain that a little bit more deeply in terms of why losing 2 Democratic seats would affect, you're talking about Senator Leatherman.
Correct. Senator Leatherman is President Pro Tem of the South Carolina Senate, and the Democrats...
He's a Republican.
He is a Republican, and Democrats vote for him almost every year, most of the Democrats. So if you lose 2 of those votes, you're going to see a potential fraction of the Republican Party electing someone different.
Many people would argue that Senator Leatherman is only nominally a Republican. He typically has the entire Democratic caucus on lockdown, and at that point, he just has to pick up, a few Republicans in order to retain power. If there are a couple more Republicans who are elected to the Senate, there's going to be a mad dash to see who can get in their ear first, whether it's the more conservative Republicans in the Senate or the more moderate, Democratic-leaning Republicans in the Senate, and how that shakes out will be very interesting.
Anything on that?
Well, I just in talking about those trying to flip those seats, Governor Haley was up, in Crank Coleman's former seat, campaigning against Mike Fanning, and that was clearly an indicator to me that was something that the Republicans felt pretty comfortable they could pick up with a little bit of effort. So we may be in line to see some of those changes kicking in.
Well, Scott mentioned BVAP earlier, the black voting population, and in both of those seats, both the Fairfield seat and the Richland County seat, the BVAP is high, which historically means is going to go democratically. So I think that they would have to have fought very, very hard for a Republican to win either of those seats, but the party saw both of them as targets for them this year.
And Haley's venture into it was kind of late in the cycle, so that may have been too little too late.
Now, we'll just go back to this one more time. I think it's worth it. It's interesting that there are 46 seats in the Senate. 2 are competitive right now. I mean, that really speaks to just what a problem gerrymandering is.
We're down to about 5 minutes left for this show, and Brent, I want to give you 2 of those.
Well, great, thank you. So I want to ask both Sabrina and Suleiman, what are you looking for in the next administration? Sabrina, how can they meet your needs as a millennial?
That is a good question. I think it is going to be focused a lot on education and whether or not we see that free education come into play, because we are going to be moving into the workforce soon, and that's going to be affecting us and the students that are coming after us into college. And I think there's going to be a shift from millennials having a strong enthusiasm about which political party they're going to be about, and you're going to see a change to millennials being more passionate about the individual issues that are affecting us, and because, again, like I said, it is going to affect us going into the workforce.
So not so much parties, but issues.
But singular issues.
Suleiman, do you agree with that?
Based on the education comment, I feel like that will be the silver bullet to a lot of the racial tensions we see in this country. I, for one, would appreciate a United States that didn't perpetuate a candidate that decides to say that it's okay to ban all Muslims. It's kind of unfortunate that it's 2016 that we see that now. Criminal justice reform is an issue. We incarcerate, a lot of African Americans in this country. We incarcerate the most out of in the world, right next to China. Also, our foreign policy in the Middle East is concerning. I don't want to have to see another American soldier with boots on the ground in general in the Middle East. We're hardly taking care of our veterans as it stands.
Well, thank you very much. The millennial generation is now larger than the baby boomer, so you all are the future. Thank you for your comments tonight.
Thank you.
Charles?
Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. And we've given all these wonderful things to worry about, unfortunately. We're down to about 3 minutes here. So let me start on your end there, Joel, and kind of try and wrap things up. I was tempted to say, should we start looking at the 2018 governor's race, or should we just leap ahead to 2020? But Because obviously these are going to be incredibly different races because of the impact of 2016. So what have we learned through the process of 2016? In a 30-second nutshell, what have we learned?
No, I don't know that we learned anything. America is deeply, deeply divided, and there is all the incentive in the world for both parties to be as extreme as possible right now. Hopefully there will be some changes to lead to more people not just participating right now, but participating in the primary process. Because if you hate your choices now, you should have gotten involved 6 or 8 months ago.
Amanda, what have we learned?
I think something very similar. We are very divided, but I think that we can move forward, and I think no matter who wins tonight, we need to coalesce together and we need to find change that we can all agree on.
I can give you 10 more seconds if you got. Have we learned anything other than that?
Excuse me. I think that, as you mentioned, 18 and 20, we have a really big elections coming up. We're going to have a open governor seat, and that's going to be big for South Carolina. Excuse me.
That's what. Scott?
Well, I was almost inspired to start in on Kumbaya with that. Well, they're coming together. But what I think we're going to see is if Hillary Clinton wins, then all the talk about how this was, such an upending election, in 50 years when we analyze this, it'll just be a standard election because it will have been true that the candidate who ran a standard campaign with the standard structure won. But if Donald Trump wins, then everything gets upended about how to run a campaign, and for the next 2 cycles we'll wonder, okay, do we need to run campaigns differently, or could only Donald Trump have done it this way? So my takeaway as somebody who teaches campaigns and elections is either continuity or absolute uncertainty.
The uncertainty of the evening is how this evening will turn out. Thank you for setting that one up for me. Because we're here approaching the 9 o'clock hour, and we don't know what's happening yet in Florida or North Carolina or Ohio or Pennsylvania or so many of those, and the, I believe, 16 states that are about to lock up their polls at the 9 o'clock hour and start counting in those. So sweat it out with the rest of us this evening. 2016 has been quite an election year. I want to thank all of our guests for being with us this evening, and as always, I thank you for joining us. For everyone at ETV, I'm Charles Bierbauer. Good night.